It's important to remove it. We are looking to prevent any sort of phase shift towards algal-dominated reef. It supports a different type of habitat. Different fish tend to go for an algae-dominated reef, so the coral reef system that supports not only, or Kaneohe Bay that supports not only a number of corals, it also supports a number of fish and an entire ecosystem of organisms. So when an algae species such as the smothering seaweed or the euchema starts to take over, then the organisms and the marine life that are supported by the coral reef can actually be degraded to a point where it's a completely different system, which affects the whole bay. It's not just, the coral species that we're looking at, which is what we want people to understand. The goal of our project is to be able to keep the algae down at a level to where it can support the marine life that the native fish, the native coral, the native species of Kaneohe Bay can continue to thrive. It hasn't reached a carrying capacity yet to where it'll die off on its own, so what we're trying to do is use mechanical removal in support with the biocontrol to be able to negate the effects of the algae at this point. If the algae stays on a coral for a long enough period of time, the coral is likely to die. So.
Oh, it is. I figured it'd be softer.
Yeah. It's been around in the bay since the 1970s. Since then, it has just increased to really high levels that have become really destructive to the coral in the bay. It kind of works twofold, where it can erode the corals that it's around, but it also smothers and shades it to where the corals don't get the nutrients that they need. So that is typically why when somebody looks at an invasive species, they wonder how damaging it is, and then they also look to see whether or not there's potential to be able to mitigate the effects of the algae. The way I heard the bay described in the early 1900s was just this pristine environment. And while this bay is still beautiful, you are seeing the anthropogenic effects of degradation. There's been introduced algae species, both accidental and purposely introduced by people. The algae reproduces asexually, so when it fragments, it can take hold and be able to spread at pretty large distances. We used to think that it was only going to stay in one part of the bay, and it's gotten all the way up to North Bay. Fortunately, this particular species of algae hasn't proliferated beyond Kaneohe Bay, but that's what we want to try and prevent, to make sure that anybody who comes out here and uses the water, to make sure that the algae that's invasive here remains in the bay, that we can work to reduce its effects and hopefully at some point eradicate it. And then the other part of that is just to make sure that we're trying to reduce any sort of stress levels to try and keep the coral and the fish and the marine life as healthy as possible, so people can continue to use the bay as it once was used. So, from Mauka to Makai is really, we go back to that statement a lot, but not only ocean users can affect the effluents that are coming into the bay, and so people from anywhere can contribute, whether you use the water or not, to make sure that you're doing your part to keep our environment as clean as possible. The biocontrol aspect with the native urchin that we're using has really increased our ability to go to larger areas of the reef and hopefully sustain the removal that we've already done mechanically. So for people who don't know, what happens is when we see a place overgrown in the reef with algae, we'll assess it before, and then once we get an idea of where the algae's at, once we've mapped it, we go out and we plan to mechanically remove it with a trash pump using underwater vacuums that get brought onto our barge, which the water is filtered out. So you just have the algae gets bagged up, and then we actually give to farmers to be used for fertilizer. Once we clear an area, the algae grows back very quickly. Actually, it can double in size in 30 days, so it's a pretty high growth rate for this particular species. So what was proposed a few years ago was that we could take a native urchin that is known to graze on this particular species and develop a hatchery to where we are able to grow the urchins in a large number so that we can actually put them back out onto the reef where we've cleared to keep the algae down. There's some experimental projects going on to see whether putting just the urchins out will be effective, or as effective as the coupling with the mechanical manual removal and the urchins, and then So there's actually 4 reefs that have been completely cleared in the bay, patch reefs, that have been planted with the urchins on it. And since then, those have remained sustainable, and we don't have to go back and clear. Sometimes we'll have to move urchins around and herd them to put them back on the algae areas, but for the most part, it's actually a very successful project.
This is one that we released from earlier, so as you can see how much it's grown in even just the past 4 months.
I have fallen in love with invertebrates since I've come here. They're special creatures, and they're able to work for us, which is great.
Yeah.